It's been a year since Israel launched its deadliest ever offensive in Gaza. The wave of air raids on Hamas targets across the territory killed more than 200 people in what was one of the bloodiest single days in that decades-long conflict. The aim was to end the barrage of crude rockets being constantly fired by Islamic militants towards Israeli towns. On that level, it's been a success, but Israel's been paying a high price, with its standing in the international community plummeting. Middle East correspondent Ben Knight reports, and a warning: viewers might find some of the following images disturbing.
Gaza isn't a place you visit for the scenery. Not that tourists are allowed in anyway. Both Israel and Egypt keep their official borders tightly sealed. For 4 weeks at the beginning of this year, this narrow 40-kilometre long strip of Mediterranean coast was pounded from air, land and sea by the Israeli army, and it still carries the scars. A year later, some of the damage has been cleared up, but with imports of steel, cement and glass still banned by Israel, rebuilding is almost impossible. During the war, Israel banned all foreign media from coming into Gaza independently. We're now heading back to the first place that I was able to get to once the shooting stopped. Back then, Abed Rabba was an apocalyptic scene, with street after street of flattened apartment blocks. This family used to take up 2 floors of one building. 12 months on, they're living in tents donated by France and a container from Turkey. Cast lead bombed them back to their roots, and it's a change this family is still adjusting to.
We are living like Bedouin in tents. The girls of today are not used to this kind of life.
Operation Cast Lead was launched to put a stop to years of Hamas rocket attacks on Israel's southern towns and cities. From Israel's point of view, it did what it was meant to do, but it also killed hundreds of Palestinian civilians, including children. Israel blames those deaths on Hamas for using its own citizens as human shields, but that hasn't saved Israel's reputation.
Well, there's no question that the international status of Israel has been damaged as a result of the Cast-Lead operation. I think that the Israeli authorities had not taken into account the level of negative response on the side of the world before this operation. I'm not saying by that had they taken this in account, they would have behaved differently. But I don't think that it was under the radar, and I think that that we are paying a very, very high price.
Israel has been losing friends, and it's not just the relationship with the White House that's cooled. Its once close relationship with Turkey has been all but destroyed by the Gaza war. Israel has had resolutions against it in the European Union, the Atomic Energy Agency and the United Nations General Assembly. The British government even advised its supermarkets to label products that come from Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. But by far the biggest problem for Israel came in September, with the release of the UN Human Rights Council's report into the Gaza war, headed by Jewish judge Richard Goldstone. It accused Israel of war crimes, including deliberately targeting civilians and wantonly destroying civilian infrastructure. The impact of that report became clear last week when an arrest warrant was issued in London for Tzipi Livni, Israel's former foreign minister, now its opposition leader. The warrant was withdrawn after Tzipi Livni cancelled her trip to Britain.
When the state of Israel has to do the right thing, it has to be done, arrest warrants or no arrest warrants. As far as I'm concerned, I would repeat each and every decision.
And the situation hasn't changed. Israel's alternative Prime Minister now can't travel to Britain and who knows which other countries without facing arrest on war crimes allegations. Israel has tried hard to discredit the Goldstone report with American backing, but it's also taken a different tack, making subtle suggestions that the world needs to rethink the laws of war.
The norms that govern warfare today are in many ways not so relevant to the current security challenges.
Yohanan Plesner is a former Israeli army commando who now maintains Israel's relations with Europe.
In the new kind of warfare today, civilians are more likely to get hurt as long as terrorist organizations and their sponsors are relying or situating the center of gravity of their forces within the civilian population.
That's exactly what Hamas did in Gaza. So did Hezbollah in southern Lebanon a few years ago.
What are you going to do when this is not an exception, but this is the strategy?
Asa Kashir wrote the Israeli army's code of ethics.
If you try to apply the rules, the ordinary rules, to such circumstances, then you reach the conclusion that you lost your ability to defend yourself, which is absurd.
When you're saying you're hampered in fighting your wars, what is it exactly you want to do? If parties to conflicts don't respect rules, that doesn't mean that the opposite party can then say, well, we won't respect the rules either.
Israel's problem is not just where it fought in Gaza, but how. White phosphorus burns down to the bone. It's not supposed to be used in built-up civilian areas. Juma al-Najjar was one of those hit with a white phosphorus shell.
All over my legs. It felt like I was on fire.
Before the war, Juma al-Najjar was a textile salesman. He can now barely walk, and his right hand is paralysed, and he can't get out of Gaza for treatment.
Before I was wounded, I was the breadwinner in my home. Now I'm sitting in the house wondering how to support my family.
Israel knows it's not the only nation faced with the problem of fighting enemies who operate in civilian zones.
The NATO forces are facing similar challenges in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The US and the Brits are facing those challenges in Iraq and elsewhere.
But starting a discussion on adapting the long-standing laws of warfare will not be easy.
The only problem is that Israel cannot be the one who initiates it. If we are the ones who are doing it, the whole world will be against it.
Almost a year after the Israeli army left Gaza, the Israeli public still strongly supports what these soldiers did there. But this is a country that's used to winning its wars while losing at public relations.
That report from Ben Knight.